My name is Joe Rigney, Fellow of Theology at New St. Andrews College. The Bible tells us that there are two fundamental ways to live: the way of the righteous and the way of the wicked, the way of the wise and the way of the fool, God's way and the world's way. And every one of us must choose which way to follow, which way to live. We make this choice every day of our lives. This summer at the Called Conference in Moscow, Idaho, I want to clarify this choice for you. Using the first chapter of the book of Romans, we'll explore the two ways in terms of worship and glory, in terms of manhood, womanhood, sexuality, and in terms of our relationships with other people. The wrath of God is revealed against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. And the pleasure of God is revealed upon all godliness and righteousness of men, who by their righteousness celebrate the truth. The choice of ways is before you. I hope to see you there.
The American church really is gay.
Are you asking me out on a date?
Effeminate.
The Bible appears more to whisper when it comes to sexual sin.
Shallow.
I said, I want the African American 7.
And full of cowardly leaders.
Are we going to keep bickering over secondary issues?
America desperately needs to return to the Father. Either we fall on the rock and are broken, or we fall on the ground and are crushed under that rock. To fall on top of the rock and be broken is exactly the condition in which God brings reformation and revival. So which way is it, Prodigal America? Are you coming home to the Father? Join us this Reformation Day in Fort Worth, Texas, October 31st through November 2nd at Will Rogers Event Center, just days before our presidential election. And join with the thousands of us for the blessing of gathering together with God's people and celebrating God's goodness with beer and psalms. Hear from speakers such as Dr. James White, Pastor Toby Sumter, Pastor Doug Wilson, Dr. George Grant, Gabe and Knox, Steve Dace, and more. Don't forget our Business Makers Conference, Jumpy Castles for the kiddos, after parties, single events, the Pastor's Luncheon, the Business Leaders Luncheon, and many more surprises coming. America has squandered her inheritance far too long. It's time she repents and returns home to her Father. Fight, Laugh, Feast presents Prodigal America.
Knox, where are you? So I want you guys to be praying for the show just right from the jump, because after the show, we'll probably be getting audited by the IRS. Well, hey, y'all, welcome to Cross Politics on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. Pastor Toby, the Water Boy,
Joe Vandal,
and Joe Vandal,
or
Knox. Yep. See, no, let's go back to Joe Vandal. There you go, Joe. Joe, what do you got to say? What do you got to say?
Yeah. Speechless.
There you go. Yep.
Speechless.
Speechless. He's just as mad at Knox as I am.
Yeah. So God the Father is waiting and looking down the road for all his prodigal sons to return. Will Prodigal America return to the Father in repentance, confessing that Jesus Christ is Lord, or will we fall to our own destruction and become a pillar of salt as a memorial for all the other nations? Join us on Reformation Weekend this fall, October 31st through November 2nd in Fort Worth, Texas, for the annual Fight, Laugh, Feast conference. This year's theme, Prodigal America. You'll spend the weekend hearing from Dr. George Grant, Dusty Devers, Steve Dace, James White, Doug Wilson, of course, Knox, Gabe, myself. We will be there. We'll do a live show. There'll be psalm singing. There'll be feasting. ProdigalAmerica.com. You want to sign up today.
Good ad read. Is that the only one we're doing?
That's the only one we're going to do.
Okay.
But, so with us on the show right now, I thought you were about to say something, and I was going to let you say something.
No. I just agreeing.
Just enjoying that ad.
Yeah.
We're really grateful to have with us a former IRS agent.
Joe Banister.
Joseph Banister, former special agent for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division.
Yeah. He was in the thick of it.
And he resigned.
He repented of his sins, and then he resigned.
And then he was prosecuted by the IRS and won a case.
Wow.
Joe, thank you for joining us on Cross Politic.
Thank you, Pastor Toby. Thanks, Gabriel.
Great to be here.
So I know I don't even I might have even botched the story as I was introducing you, but you've just we really do want to hear your story. You were an IRS agent for how many years, and then people began bringing you concerns that allegations that you listed in this letter that I have that I think it was I don't know if this was your resignation letter, but at least your initial appeal to the IRS that the federal income tax is actually voluntary and not required, that maybe the 16th Amendment was never even ratified, that federal income taxes are not used to actually operate the federal government. You bring these concerns, these allegations are brought to you. You think this is what wackos think, this is what crazy people think, but then you start looking into it, and what happened?
Well, I guess a brief background. I graduated with an accounting degree from San Jose State University, and I didn't realize at that point, should have, that accounting is a pretty boring discipline. So when I got into the accounting profession, it got even more boring. And so I thought, well, I need to spice up my life a little bit. And so I decided to get into law enforcement, yet use those financial and training and skills that I got my degree in. I was also a CPA at the time, and so I applied to the FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division.
Wow! And
the FBI actually qualified to be hired by the FBI, but there was a hiring freeze, as you know. The Congress fights over how much money to spend, and once in a while, these little victories or defeats, depending on who's looking. And the FBI had a freeze. They couldn't hire anyone because the money wasn't, earmarked to do the hiring. So here I am in this holding pattern, waiting to get my letter to Quantico, Virginia. And then, meanwhile, I had applied to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division as more of a backup. And, this is back in the 90s when the FBI had a little bit better of a reputation than they do today.
Right.
And the IRS never had a good reputation, but I was told by a mentor it'd be better to apply to at least a couple agencies. So FBI couldn't hire me. IRS comes around and asked me if I'd be interested in a special agent position with their agency. And FBI couldn't hire me. So I'm like, okay, I'll go for it.
Yeah.
And, being that I had an accounting and tax background anyway, there was somewhat of a good fit there with the IRS. But, like, who wants to work for the IRS? But
Hi, I'm a tax collector.
So you took the job.
So it was because it was the Criminal Investigation Division, I was working on, high-level money laundering cases and tax investigations, and working jointly with Secret Service and local and state police, and during search warrants, kicking down doors, seizing vehicles, and all that kind of stuff. So I felt like I was using my skills training to protect the U.S. Treasury,
especially kicking down those doors.
Yeah.
What's that?
Especially kicking down those doors.
Yeah. So anyway, I was feeling good about the job that there had to be done, and it's not like I've abandoned believing there should be a government or the government needs to tax or anything like that. But anyway, so the IRS was like, well, they asked me to go work for them. I said yes. I was sworn in. Every federal employee, including criminal investigators, have to swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And I took that oath very seriously. That was in November of 1993.
Okay. And
I was at the IRS for about 5.5 years, nearly 5.5 years. And I expected to spend a full 20-year career there. But about 3 years into the 5.5 years, I was listening to a talk radio show where, as she kind of alluded to before, I was listening to a lady say that the income tax was, largely a voluntary system because there wasn't a mandate. There wasn't actually a law that Congress ever passed and a president ever signed that made the average American required to pay the federal income tax. And when I heard her say this on the radio, I was driving in my government car with my Sig Sauer 9mm on my left hip because I'm a lefty.
Yep.
And handcuffs, and I thought to myself, lady, this tax ain't voluntary. It's absolutely mandatory.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's what started about 2.5 years of off-duty research and investigation on my part. I didn't ask the IRS for permission to do any kind of formal investigation. Even government employees, if they recognize that they have a personal life and the ability to be a good citizen and vote and pay attention to issues and things like that. So I wanted to dig to the bottom of these claims that the lady, DV Kid, made on the radio that day. And, I had a 50-hour work week, father of two, husband, soccer coach, all kinds of busyness to my life. But I still, doggedly kept investigating every chance I got over this 2.5-year period. And if I had any bias at all, it was that these claims were bogus. They couldn't possibly be true. My entire professional life revolved around the income tax. And I thought, well, how come I didn't discover this earlier or, look into it earlier? But I felt I really had a duty to get to the bottom of it. As I say, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution, took it to God, and I'm not going to, that's not a light matter at all.
Right.
So I, despite a bias, I'd say, against the information, being that I was a criminal investigator, I knew how to search for evidence, go after testimony. And after a year and a half, 2 years, I was like, wow, there's a lot of evidence indicating that the IRS is, lying, deceiving the American people, and that the media is complicit in it. And when it came to the end, I basically thought, okay, well, I'm working for the IRS. All of my supervisors and everyone up the chain of command took the same oath that I took to support and defend the Constitution. They're bound by the same Treasury regulations to report, fraud, waste, and abuse. And so this might be kind of a bitter pill I'll be offering them, that I'm concerned about this, but hey, we all have a duty. Let's do our duty. But they didn't see it that way. Once I approached them with my concerns about what I had found about the income tax, and I didn't find any, new theories or anything on my own. I was simply looking at existing evidence to poke at it to see, well, does this make sense? Does it square with what the Supreme Court says? Who's telling me the truth? And so I just put all of my abilities into answering that question.
So Joe, are you paying your income taxes right now?
The last time I filed a federal income tax return was 1998.
Okay, so basically, you're kind of living by by your findings.
Absolutely.
And has the IRS audited you after 1998?
One time after the criminal prosecution.
Was that after 1998?
Yes.
And so they saw that you weren't paying federal income tax in the audit, and they didn't assess any penalties on you?
Well, it's a little bit larger story than that. Basically, once I resigned from the IRS, which was in February of 1999, and there was a fair amount of media attention that the IRS doesn't like people saying something different than what they tell the public, shall we say. And so they, in order to silence and discredit me as rapidly and effectively as possible, they instituted a criminal investigation, criminal prosecution against me. And then once that didn't work, because I was deservedly acquitted of the charges, and we can go deeper into the trial, then they turned to the audit, because it's like, well, it didn't work to silence and discredit him with being a convicted felon. So let's resort to the audit.
So tell us about what are the charges that were brought against you, and then tell us about your exoneration.
Okay. Well, so after I left the IRS, and being a gun-carrying agent, I guess most of the public thinks that everything there is to know about the IRS. And I was a CPA, still at the time, certified public accountant. So this man approached me and said, I'd like you to help me get my money back that I've already paid into the IRS. And there's actually a process, it's called an amended tax return. And you can actually, by following the IRS rules, you can file an amended tax return and seek a refund.
Okay.
And so naively, I thought, well, if I'm going to follow the rules, and I know what the rules are, and I can look them up, and I can make sure that I follow them and that my client follows them. What could be wrong with my client asking for his money back that he had already paid in? And so we amended his tax returns for 3 years prior to, the 3 most recent years at the time. And like I say, I was very naive because the IRS turned our refund request that followed down to the letter, every jog and tittle to the letter of the law and the rules. The IRS claimed that was a fraudulent refund claim times 3, because there were 3 different tax returns for 3 different years.
Got it.
And then they threw in a 4th charge of conspiracy to defraud the United States of America.
Golly.
So in November of 2004, I was indicted along with the client on these 4 counts: 3 false federal income tax returns that they claimed I prepared, or alleged that I prepared falsely, and then a 4th charge of conspiracy. And so my trial was about 7 months later in June of 2005. And mind you, by this time, by June of 2005, I had already not filed a federal income tax return for 5 years.
Right.
But they nothing about that in the criminal prosecution. It was all in this other issue about, preparing false returns
Right.
and submitting them. So June of 2005 was the trial, and I was acquitted of all the charges. The 3 false federal income tax returns that they claimed, I prepared.
Right.
The IRS expert got up on the witness stand. He had like 28 years experience, and he was supposed to tell the jury about all the false and fraudulent, entries that I put on the tax return that I prepared. And he couldn't testify to a single false or fraudulent entry. So the jury's scratching their head like, well,
why are we here?
Yeah. Shouldn't he be able to point out dozens and dozens? I mean, the returns probably are 15 pages a piece, something like that. I don't recall.
Yeah.
Couldn't testify to a single false or fraudulent entry, section, paragraph, page.
Yeah.
Then for the conspiracy charge, the special agent who investigated me, who I used to work with when I worked there, he couldn't testify to any evidence of a conspiracy between me and the client. So the jury's really scratching their heads by this point. And like I say, deservedly, I was acquitted of all 4 charges.
Goodness.
And, to think that the DOJ and the IRS, and, nowadays people can see how dirty the DOJ is. But at that time, they basically prosecuted me with no evidence, because if they had any, they certainly would have, gave it to me with both barrels during the trial. And thankfully, the jury was paying attention, and they could see that there was just no evidence of, wrongdoing, according to the charges that they brought.
That's amazing. So they came after you. I think where I'm interested at in this conversation is you haven't paid federal income tax since 1999 or whatever, 98. What legally are you standing on to not pay federal income tax? What did you find? What would your research and findings, and how did you come to this conclusion to not pay it? And it seems like the government's not going after you for this.
Well, I guess I want to, first of all, give a caveat that if somebody asks me the question like you do, I'm going to truthfully answer it. But I don't go around touting that, because I don't want people to think, oh, well, if, Joe doesn't file, I'm not going to file.
Right.
I'm not going to pay. There's a lot of reasons that I have. First of all, I was a link in the chain to put people in prison over this.
Oof.
And I was raised that, in the USA, we don't have political prisoners. And of course, I was born in 1963, and back in the 60s and 70s. And I guess I'm a pretty naive guy, but I thought, well, only Cuba, the Soviet Union, they have political prisoners. But here, if you break the law, you deserve to go to jail, but not if it's over some political matter or some status quo that the government's trying to, keep in place. So that's my first and foremost motivation to make sure I know what the truth is and was. And then secondly, in my research, I found that indeed the claim is true that most Americans aren't liable to pay the federal income tax. And you can go to my website, agentfortruth.com, where I basically spell out how the IRS themselves, or the agency itself, tells the public, they're required by law to tell the public when the public is supposed to file a tax return. And it's when they're liable to pay a tax. Not just the income tax, actually. The IRS says any tax. And I agree with that. That makes sense. That's what the courts have ruled. And so I searched for a statute, a law, that was passed by Congress that made me liable for the federal income tax. Didn't exist. And then I asked the IRS, as an IRS agent, I approached them very professionally and politely with all sincerity, and they told me to resign rather than answer my questions. After I left the IRS, I continued to ask questions personally by writing letters. I joined a group called We the People Foundation. We went to Washington, D.C., and we met with all three branches of government. I guess the Supreme Court, we actually had to provide a petition in writing. I didn't sit down with any of the justices. But my efforts to get answers other than that were contrary to what I found with my own training and experience. And the government is just so suspicious. And of course, you don't have time to go into all the suspicious ways that they've avoided answering the questions.
Right.
So anyway, I'm not liable to pay the federal income tax. I certainly continue to revisit the matter. And if I were to ever find that I was wrong after all these 25 years, or that the government actually could show me where I was wrong, I will most happily, I'm a law-abiding person. I'm not anti-government. People will see on my website, my family, all badges and guns for Joe Banister and his brothers.
Right.
That has never changed. So anyway, that's in a nutshell.
So particularly, because this is one of the things I guess kind of heard in the last 4 or 5 months is that basically our labor, the courts have ruled this. Apparently, even IRS code talks about this, that our labor is not taxable. Meaning, you hire me for $25 an hour to work for you, and we're just exchanging my labor for your benefit kind of thing, my labor to fix your toilet or whatever, and that there's no profit in that. It's just an exchange of my labor, and it's worth $25 an hour. Does that make sense, Toby? So that is not profit, and so therefore it's not taxable. Am I explaining it correctly, Joe?
Yeah, I'd say you're spot on. And again, at agentfortruth.com, I walk people through, my best understanding of what you just explained. The term income is thrown around by everybody, from freshmen in high school with their first job to 95-year-old World War II veterans or whatever it might be. Yeah. But there's a constitutional definition of income. And, because income is actually mentioned, income is actually mentioned in the 16th Amendment, right, that's another story about whether it was fraudulently ratified. But presuming that it was correctly ratified, income is used in the 16th Amendment, and that became part of the Constitution. And Congress can't define a word in the Constitution. The Supreme Court has to do that. Otherwise, you can imagine how the Congress might define the Second Amendment or the First Amendment, things like that.
Right.
Anyway, the Supreme Court has defined income, and as you pointed out, Gabriel, it has to do with having a gain, something that is separated from the body, the corpus. So, as a really simple example, think of an apple tree, and apples can be picked off of and can fall off of the apple tree without any harm to the apple tree. So those apples are like income. They come off the apple tree, The apple tree is not harmed by taking the apples off the tree, and the apple tree continues to grow and grow more apples, on into the future until someday it dies. So you think about that in your own life when you, unlike an apple tree where you trade your time for, say, $25 an hour, your time is your property. And that's not Joe Banister's opinion. That's the Supreme Court's opinion.
Right.
And so you have your property, which is your own time. That's what you use to survive, to thrive, to exist. And you trade an hour of your life for $25 because that's what somebody's willing to pay you.
Right.
Well, then you've put in $25 into that equation and you've gotten $25 back. And there is no gain that's gone on there. And another interesting factor, I'll try to make it real quick, but think about if you're a landscape contractor and you have a worker who you bill out, right, for your landscaping, and you pay that worker $25 an hour. If you go and prepare a tax return and file a tax return, you can deduct every hour that you paid that guy or gal at $25 an hour.
Right.
So their labor is worth $25 to somebody who hires them. But if that same person is working for themselves, all of a sudden the IRS says that your labor is worth zero.
Yeah.
And that's how the IRS says that you have a $25 per hour gain on your labor, is because you received $25, but your labor's worth zero. So you have a $25 gain.
Wow.
Enough.
Let me read this out, and then I want to.
It's pretty amazing. I've seen Toby. Just so you know, I've seen the court cases.
Yeah.
I've had friends walk me through all this, and it's anyways.
Yeah.
We'll keep going.
Are you thinking differently about your family's finances and resources?
Yes. After this,
now you are. While others worry about surviving to the next paycheck, the hand of the diligent will rule, while the slothful will be put to forced labor. Train your mindset to see where God is moving, where to invest and build so you can create, protect, and pass on your wealth. What is your plan to use your economic power? Joe Garrissey with Backwards Planning Financial coaches his clients to make this kind of impact on their world for generations by integrating investments, debt, insurance, tax-efficient strategies, and legacy planning. So go to backwardspanningfinancial.nm, like New Mexico, backwardspanningfinancial.nm.com, and connect with Joe Garrissey today. Joe, this is kind of blowing my mind, but I want to go back to.
He's got a book actually called "Investigating the Federal Income Tax."
Okay, we got to get that.
Yeah.
But my question, I guess, is as Gabe was asking you a minute ago, you said, I want to clarify that even though this is what I've done and I've tried to do it very carefully and very methodically, I'm not trying to get a bunch of people to just stop paying their income taxes. And I really appreciate that, but I just want to hear from you. Like, so what do you mean?
If you're in the right,
what do you mean by that? And I mean, I'm a pastor, so like I am also kind of interested in, like, people have asked me before, certain legal questions, and I'm like, you need to be really, really careful about this kind of thing, and count the cost, this kind of thing. But what are you thinking when you say that, Joe?
Well, I guess as I mentioned before, I have particular life experiences where I, take it very seriously about taking an oath to support and defend the Constitution. For example, I take it very seriously that, my parents raised me not to steal or help someone else or some agency steal. And I'm convinced after, 25, 30 years of being at this, that the IRS is deceiving people and stealing from them. But then there's all kinds of reactions that people might have to that. You have people, and I've never had to live in Chicago or New York, but I know that the mafia will, send around their leg breakers and say, hey, we'd like to protect your business and we'd like your cooperation.
Yeah.
Pay us $500 a month. And so am I the person that should go to them and say, why are you paying the mafia? Do I have the wherewithal to defend all the people that stop paying the mafia?
Right.
So I think it's more of just a prudential realization. Now, other people may hear this, some people may hear this message and think, well, I'm in a position with what I do for a living and my family circumstances where I'm going to look more into this, and I'm going to find out. And if the truth is as Joe says it is, I may change my life too in the way that I interact with the IRS. So I guess my bottom line is I'm not. This isn't some cookie cutter approach. The IRS has had over 100 years to build this deceitful web, and with the cooperation, of course, with the media. And I'm sure you guys have seen how the media can jump on somebody.
Yep.
So, I can't control all those factors. I wish that, the American people would wake up to all that's going on and realize that they're this beast that is, devouring us in so many different ways. Together, we've got to figure out something. But I'm just not the kind of person that wants to send, it'd be like, my mother's 85 years old, and she has a Second Amendment right and a right to defend herself, but I wouldn't send her down in a bad part of town because she's got that right.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, if that kind of paints a picture.
Those are helpful.
It does. Yeah. So my one question would be, so you were on the inside. I mean, you actually were investigating and enforcing this for a few years. I mean, maybe there's not a one size fits all answer to this, but I mean, what frequently happens to people who just don't pay their income taxes? I mean, is this? I've sort of assumed that you end up in just sort of years and years of litigation and audits and just that kind of thing. But I mean, is that often what happens? I mean, obviously, some people don't pay. Not out of principle like you, but just they don't care, or they intentionally think I don't care that it's a fraud. I'm fine with fraud. But if as people do this, I mean, as you've studied this and so forth, I mean, is the ordinary outcome decades of just court dates and litigation, or what usually happens?
It's a very wide range. I guess I'll first couch what I'm about to say by reminding people that as a CPA and a trained gun carrying IRS agent, it still took me two and a half years of part-time research and investigation to realize, well, I need to speak up, right? And then that turned into a resignation and everything after that.
Right.
But so your average viewer, listener to your show, they need to take that into consideration. Like, this can take some time. And so what I encourage people to do is educate themselves. That's still not illegal, not yet. And a lot of it's free. There's my website, there's links on my website as a starting point, but they can go and start anywhere. They can go to Wikipedia and say what Wikipedia has to say about me. It's not going to be very kind.
Yeah.
Same for us.
In terms of the wide range, there's a wide range. I know people personally who haven't, paid in 25 years, haven't filed a tax return in 25 years, and they're doing okay, and they've never been audited. I know other people that stopped filing and paying after just a few years, and then they got, hammered. But then again, they were able to kind of keep the 800-pound gorilla at bay, because the IRS is an 800-pound gorilla that if it steps or sits on you, you're gonna, you're gonna hurt.
Right.
But it's also like blind and deaf. It doesn't, it's like the Cookie Monster that it just can't really see where to get you.
Interesting.
So, and then just as an example, when I was a special agent, there were about 3,000 special agents, criminal investigators. Now there's only 2,100.
Huh.
The 87,000 agents that they talk about, that's actually going to be 8,700 a year for 10 years.
Okay.
And they're not hiring, gun carrying agents. They're hiring clerks and, paper pushers and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of, actually, I mean, the IRS enforcement as a whole has taken a nosedive.
Okay.
So
That's all good news. I mean, I don't know how to respond. So, you haven't run into any problems with the income tax thing. I guess I'm trying. One of the things I'm thinking of is like, how many things are citizens doing that we just assume is right because the government says so? Like the income tax.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if our labor, and I saw the court ruling on this, if our labor is not defined as profit, but just exchange, as they define it, as the Supreme Court defined it, but we're still paying income tax based off our labor wages.
Yeah.
I mean, you said a lot, Joe. There's a lot of, presuming, where citizens are just presuming, oh, this is the way it goes because this is what the government's always told us. Well, we never check the law. We never check.
Well, H&R Block and whatever. Like, there's like, here, this is your estimated tax.
You work with your accountant. Your accountant punches the buttons and the computer programming.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it seems like
the government and the media definitely use people's lack of sophistication, and I don't mean that to denigrate. I'm just saying, like, when I learned about all the COVID vaccine nonsense,
right?
I'm not a medical background. Scientific isn't my background either, so I struggle to understand the acronyms and the everything. So but the IRS, the income tax, the media. They definitely capitalize on the people's ignorance, just absence of awareness, about what's going on. And I think my wish list, my wish would be that tens of millions of Americans would find out about this, and then a certain selection, few of those are going to serve on juries. And then the IRS is going to be the DOJ, unable to get any more convictions.
So that brings me to this question then. You've been going at this for 25 years. You've been educating the public, your website, your book that you wrote, Investigating the Federal Income Tax, which I can imagine Amazon probably doesn't sell.
Actually, they do.
Oh, really? Really? Yeah. Interesting. How come it seems like the IRS, as more information becomes public about this, that the IRS would try to squash it harder and harder and harder, including you and your following. That hasn't happened?
Well, in the early 2000s, after I resigned, this We the People Foundation, I believe I've got some links on my website to some of the efforts that we did from, say, like 1999 through 2004. Mm-hmm. And then if you've ever heard of the film, and if you haven't, you should watch it and encourage your listeners to, America, Freedom to Fascism.
Okay.
It was in 2006, produced by Aaron Russo, the fairly well-known director who's since passed away.
Okay.
Anyway, so there's been, 25 years is a long time, and there have been really huge efforts. And then, of course, the government's response or lack of response or dirty tricks that they pulled, to me, are just further evidence that the government they're lying to us, and they know they are. Mm-hmm. So they resort to dirty tricks and those kinds of things. So thankfully, thanks be to God, I've survived it at least enough to be alive and here talking to you. Yeah. And I just never changed my tune to be a Pied Piper, leading people into the wood chipper.
Right.
It's not up to me to be a Pied Piper, but I'll certainly join with any American who wants, their government to be honorable and serve us with integrity, and certainly not lie to us about, trillions and trillions of dollars extracted from our paychecks and earnings.
Joe, what has been just again over the last 25 years or so, or maybe longer? I mean, what has been the history of the court cases? I mean, you referenced, wanting people to be educated, and those people sit on juries. But what has been the legacy of the court cases related to income tax?
Well, the IRS and DOJ, they tend to, if you've seen the wildlife shows where the lion or the cheetah will go after the exterior of the herd, the youngsters or the elderly.
Yep.
So in my experience, both inside and outside the agency, they're try to go after the low hanging fruit, the easy prosecution, people that have already, like, they've lied on past tax returns and maybe egregiously, right? And it can be proven.
Okay.
So you have to maybe do some real soul searching to find out if you're one of those people, if you're the low hanging fruit. But not only did I win my criminal court case with acquittals, but attorney Tom Cryer, who's also linked on my website, he's passed away also, but he stopped filing and paying. And he was an attorney with, amazing credentials in terms of his law degree, the law school, all kinds of awards. And he learned the truth about the income tax, stopped filing and paying. The IRS audited him. Then they turned the audit into a criminal investigation and criminal prosecution, and he was acquitted. And of course, the IRS will never publicize those kinds of cases. Right. Vernie Kuglin, she was a Federal Express pilot, a female pilot, maybe the first, like back in the 80s. And she was like 5 feet tall, and she was driving these, or flying these massive planes filled with shipping containers. And she also stopped filing and paying, and she was acquitted.
Wow.
There are quite a few other cases of people that were acquitted, but the media will never talk about that. The IRS, the DOJ won't, and they'll talk about people who are convicted, and it does happen, of course. And again, that's why I'm not trying to, blow smoke up people's skirts as far as how this works. The DOJ, we've seen in the news the last few years how ruthless they can be. Yep. And but the American people saw how ruthless the British Crown was in 1776. So I just know that for me in my life, I had to do what I had to do. And when that was not work for an agency that was stealing from the American people and deceiving them. And each person, I would just hope they'd look at the information with an open mind and pray about it. And I think God will tell them, what would be the proper path for them.
Joe Banister, agentfortruth.com. Agentfortruth.com. Give me some things to think about with the IRS. I already didn't like the IRS. If you're single, get married. If you're married, have kids. If you have kids, go baptize them. Until next week, I think, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbors as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politic without Knox.